My name is Francis Whittington, and today I'm going to be talking you through my round on Fernhill Highlight around the CCI 3-star track at Blenheim Horse Trials. Here we are in the start box with Fernhill Highlight, just getting ready to set out around the cross-country course. For me, it's important here to make sure the horses are focusing and are alert and ready to come out of the start box, listening to me as the rider, but also being prepared to focus on the fences in hand and not be distracted by too many of the public that are around the course. When Fernhill Highlight went out around the cross-country course, there weren't quite so many people out there watching, which is good, as it meant there wasn't going to be a huge amount of distraction. This is us approaching the first fence. For me, it's important here that they have a nice steady jump, gets them into their rhythm again, allows them to have a confident jump before we then start to move the gallop on around the track. Here we're coming up to the second fence here. This actually is a table that is bigger than it looked. It's important here to use this table to allow us to get into a rhythm and to jump out and forward and open over their stride. We want to get the horses into a rhythm as quickly as we can and get them also jumping and stretching out before we come back down to the third fence here, where we need to set up a little. Coming up to fence 4 now, the Protexan decks. This was going to be an important fence here. There were two very big oxes where they were going to be jumping big and out. There was a nice forward 3 strides here. This opened the horses up and allowed them to travel. Big jump here, land and ride for the 3 before then galloping on again. This was going to give them confidence for later on in the course. What it also did was opened up the stride. Where this created the question was before we came down to what happened to end up being the most influential fence on the course, which was the Fidelity Fundraiser corners. Here it was a case of following the rope round to set them up and keep the controlled canter, allow them to pop the first, control the canter down the hill, making sure you balance them so they can land and then ride up to the second corner where you jump that nicely out of the stride, but a very balanced stride. By the time I went round the cross country on Fernhill Highlight, the water and the ground into this first lake crossing was actually getting a bit deep, and it was a case of keeping him balanced so that he could see that deep ground, balance him through there and then gallop on. The next fence that we're coming up to was the Shah's Equestrian Wooded Hollow. This was the coffin fence and was going to be quite a question now at this point. It was a case of getting the balance back, making sure he's listening so that we can be soft in the hand over the first rail, over the ditch, land with your leg on to ride the 2 strides up to the third part coming out. I was really pleased with how he jumped this particular fence. As we headed up to the Cub Cadet Teddy Bears picnic, for me, this was important to allow the horse to gallop now and allow him to come down to the fence in a nice rhythm and allow him just to jump out of his stride, which Fernie did beautifully. The Equitrek Easter Island Heads is actually quite an important fence, because this fence at fence 8 here was important, whereby you had to make sure that you set the horses up for it. That's why I brought him back carefully so I could land before steadily making the turn and then riding forward up to fence 9, and then it was a regular forward distance down to the second part. That was a question that if you had the balance and maintained the balance and the rhythm was going to jump very nicely. Fence 10, Rico's Log Pile. This essentially is a led-up fence, but for me I felt this was very important, as this was going to help to set you up for the tables and the corner coming later. For me, I wanted to take them in a little closer to it, so I had a rounder jump over the table. Abingdon and Whitney College Bar. This again was an important fence to get right. For me, it was important that we steadied to the table and we made a very round jump over the table so we could ride forward on the distance to the corners. With any fence like that, I believe it's important that those fences you make a round jump over the table, trusting the horse's scope before riding on forward to the corner to keep the control in the hand. We're now setting up for the first water crossing. Land over the first part and kick hard to the second part, making the forward 2 strides before we gallop across the lake while still trying to maintain the canter work and keep the roundness where we set the horse up for the step up, land, make the stride, and then ride over the skinny rail coming out. This next fence here, Dotton Horrell Grain Store, I was travelling on an open stride to that, and I didn't want an open stride. I wanted to be able to collect him back so he was more up and down over this fence to give me the balance and control before I came to this step, bounce up over the rail. It's important here that we steady them right back, and as much as I thought that I needed to bring them back for the step up bounce over the rail, I needed to bring them back an awful lot more to ensure that we made space to get up over that rail comfortably. After a long gallop, the next fence coming up was the equestrian clearance bargain box. We've had a few complicated fences here, and it was important to give the horse a good gallop before we set them up on the turn, picked up the correct lead, maintained the balance and rode forward over these two big oxes whilst making the distance, which happened to be a very strong 2 strides in between there. This needed to give them confidence, needed to be a letter, but by the dimensions and the distance it is important that we made sure we got the right spot to that so that we could make the jump and make the distance in between. Although the Express Cafe train is in theory a let-up fence, it was very upright, and this time on the course it was important to actually give the horse some balance and support the horse to ensure that over this upright fence we didn't have a silly mistake and end up rubbing a leg. After what has been a very long gallop now, it's important to start engaging the horse's brain again and make sure that both of us are focusing. The next fence that we come up to after this long pull up this hill is the British Eventing Squirrel. This in itself again is a fairly easy fence, but after the long gallop it's important that we respect it and give them the opportunity to really see what the question is in that slight dark area. This for us is where the questions really began now, coming into the arena. We've now been galloping for 7 minutes. We come into the arena, there's a lot for them to see, a lot going on in there. It was important at this point that we moved the gallop on so we didn't waste any time. We had a nice forward distance to this rail here, jumped nicely through there, seeing our line. Now I wanted to ride through this combination on forward 3 to a shorter 3. We made the turn back, we jumped the first, I rode forward for the 3. Unfortunately, Fernhill Highlight didn't see the same 3 that we wanted, and although we made the distance comfortably, he wasn't keen on taking the line that was there. This has been a great education for him. As a result of the new rules and the way the black flag options work, we're no longer allowed to go behind the fence that we're about to jump. So I had to make sure that I made the turn back on myself and then back again before coming on a nice approach to the third part. This was a shame to have had this happen at this stage in the course. For me, that question in the arena was a schooling exercise, and if we set this option out in the school at home, we would jump through this 10 times out of 10. I think when I look back at it, having viewed it on the Headcam footage, where I took the line in, the line was good, the ride down to the second part was very good. I feel that perhaps he was just slightly on that left shoulder, and if I had made him a little straighter beforehand, I could have controlled that shoulder a little bit more. Saying that, this is experience, and I think if we rode exactly the same line over the same fence next year, when he's had a bit more mileage at this level, he'd cruise through that comfortably well. We're now at about 8.5 minutes of our gallop time as we try to set him up and come back round to the dew pond. I've now dropped right off the pace because for me it's now a case of bringing him home and making sure that he has confidence on the ride home, so he feels that he has gained in experience. I chose to take the long route here. Again, this is about confidence. I wanted him to come home. That fence had caused some problems and it wasn't necessary to take that risk anymore. As it happens, he jumped through the arrow dew pond really very nicely. The next fence is, I think, always a spectacular fence for everybody watching, the Townfield Saddle Reef Flyer. This is a case of balance, set them up, then ride forward so you have a nice forward jump over the fence. We're now getting very close to home here. The horses are starting to feel a little leg tired, saying that the ground was exceptionally good out there for all of us. The next fence we've got coming up is the Cotswold Life stone houses. These are 2 big square houses coming home. with a very short forward distance, it was important at this stage to bring the canter back, to collect the canter up so they made a nice jump over the first, balance, then allow the next 3 strides to come, which gave a nice 4th stride, but gave a very nice round jump. Getting this nice round jump was hugely important, I believe, in the setup to coming to the next fence, which was the Bates saddle rack. As I came along here, I was giving him a lot of pats, telling him he's doing a good job. I was very pleased with how he'd been going, but now I wanted his concentration again as I set him up nice and steady, quietly take him up the ramp now, the leg on, he makes the jump, sit up, balance him, see the stride, and he had a lovely even stride down to the saddle. The final fence was the Bifabin finale. Here I just wanted to make sure he was sensible, he was focused, and he jumped over that very nicely before cantering him steady through the finish. This has been a strong course, and I think it was a great course for everybody to watch. It certainly was for everybody to ride. For those horses that have competed, that had had a glance off around it, it's been a great education for them, and certainly next year I'm sure they'll benefit from having come here this year.